I'm Robin Farmanfarmaian. Today we're going to be covering three major things. First, the trend in healthcare delivery, where the patient actually receives their care. Secondly, diagnostics and treatment plans that can be accessed now directly by patients. And lastly, technologies that are augmenting and in some cases even replacing the healthcare professional. So let's start out with a scenario of what it's like to be a patient today taking advantage of these trends. Well, we are starting to see a lot of point-of-care diagnostic devices hit the market. What that means is a diagnostic device that comes to the patient versus the patient having to go to a traditional setting like a hospital or clinic. So for example, I can take my Apple Watch, which now has a clinical grade single lead EKG monitor on it. I can send the data up to the cloud where it can be shared across the care team. And if I do need to see a doctor or a nurse, I can do it in my own home or by using telemedicine. And in fact, globally, telemedicine is absolutely exploding, and it's expected to be a $41 billion industry over just the next couple of years. Companies like American Well, you might have heard of them as Amwell. Well, this is one of the largest of the telemedicine platforms. Last year, they did a large fundraise, bringing their total funding to date to over $517 million. Now, in this last round, two companies that are very interesting, Samsung and Philips. Think about that for a second. How many different medical devices, both in the hospital but in the consumer space, have one of those two logos on it? Why would they be investing in telemedicine? It's because they understand American Well doesn't want to be just a telemedicine company, but really that connector technology between payers, providers, employers, and consumer-facing technology. All right, so let's talk about what some of the big guys are doing in the industry. The large healthcare organizations, things like the VA, Veterans Affairs Office. This is the largest of the healthcare orgs here in the United States. As of earlier last year, the state boundaries for physicians came down, meaning if you are only licensed in, say, the state of New York, you are no longer having to be required to only practice telemedicine in that particular state. You can now practice across state lines. This is a really big deal because typically a license per state costs a few $100s, right? Times that by 50 states. But in addition, each one of the states have different education requirements for physicians. And so by taking down the state boundaries really opens up the world for telemedicine for the VA. Kaiser Permanente, 2017 was the first year that more than 50% of all of their clinic visits were done virtually. All right, pharmacy chains, CVS and Walgreens, both of them have launched telemedicine, all right? So you can see a doctor on demand through their apps. But in addition, CVS, which has over 9,000 stores, is investing up to $350 million in order to beef up their primary care type clinics in the pharmacies. And they really want to focus on the top 5 most expensive diseases: coronary artery disease, diabetes, and hypertension. Now, companies like United Healthcare, the payers, we're seeing a lot going on there as well. So United Healthcare, it's a Fortune 5 company, and it's the largest of the privates with almost 50 million patients covered. So this year, if you are a patient, they will now send a doctor or a nurse to your home for free one time a year. They also have been really pushing telemedicine, and if you're one of their patients, you can get an email from them once or twice a month, advertising different things to help you with your health. And in addition, they say, hey, by the way, if you want to see a doctor right now, click here for one of our telemedicine partners, and we're going to cover that for you. Point of care diagnostics, or what I like to call diagnostics on demand. We are seeing a wide array hit the clinical space and the consumer space. The one on the left, that is Philips Ultrasound. There are a couple more on the market. One is called Butterfly. Philips Ultrasound, what they do is it plugs into your smartphone. So if you are a doctor or a nurse, you can have this and you can make home calls with your patients, or bring it to the bedside, not having to worry about having an expensive ultrasound machine. By the way, it's on a subscription model, so it comes out to about $200 a month. One on the right, this is really cool. It's a company called TytoCare, and they're distributing in Best Buy. For about $300, you can go and buy this telemedicine platform. What it comes with, 4 medical device applicators and a little small video camera. The way it works is, say you're not feeling well, or raise a hand in the room, by the way, how many people have children? Right. How many people have had children who have had an earache? Yes, okay. So instead of at 2 in the morning bringing a screaming toddler to the emergency room for an earache, what you can do is you can use the app and you call a doctor on demand using the video chat, and the doctor can walk you through using these 4 different medical devices. What it does is it has an otoscope, a stethoscope, a temperature monitor, and a tongue depressor. It's really cool. These adapters fit onto the video camera, and if the doctor will say, hey, put the tongue depressor down the child's throat, or down your own throat, by the way, she can say, turn it a little bit to the left, turn it a little bit to the right, and she is able to see the video feed. So it's as if the doctor is in the room with you. How cool is that? We're starting to see blood labs going into the home as well. Companies like Let's Get Checked. The way it works is you go on the internet, either to Let's Get Checked, or I think they distribute now through companies like CVS. And for between $60 to $300 a test, you can order your own lab tests. This doesn't go through a doctor. This doesn't go through your insurance company. What you can do, it does things like CBC, liver function test, thyroid function test, cholesterol, fasting glucose, and in case anyone has a really hot date next week, 10 of the STDs. The way it works is kit comes to you in the mail, you prick the end of your finger, drops of blood go into a little container, and then bam, you put it back into the mail, and they email you your test results in a few days. And you can call them 24/7, so you can actually get someone on the phone to help you interpret the results, but they're really well laid out. And myself, I have gotten now the vast majority of my healthcare in my apartment or within a 2-block radius. So for the past 2 years, I've gotten my flu shot in my apartment. I used a company called Heal. It's an app. You just go on the app, you order a doctor and a nurse on demand, and usually it's the same day, or you can make an appointment for the next day. And they come in, they give you your flu shot, takes about 5 minutes. Guess what? 0 copay. It was fully covered by my insurance. Why would you spend the time going to a clinic or a drugstore when you can just have the doctor come straight to you? Now, you heard earlier today that not only am I an entrepreneur and a speaker, but in addition, I am a chronic disease patient. Here I am in the photo getting my Remicade. I've been on this biologic IV medication for about 20 years now. It's amazing medication, by the way. But for the first 15 years, I got it done in regular, normal hospitals. Well, let me tell you, hospitals are an incredibly important part of the healthcare system, but the thing is they were built to save and sustain life. They weren't built with the fantastic customer experience in mind, because most of the time, if you're supposed to be in the hospital, you're too sick to even notice that kind of thing. Well, when you are just an infusion patient, that's a whole different story. So I'd walk in, and there would be 15 other patients in this giant room with absolutely no windows, right? You only had thin curtains separating you, and you'd be there for 5 or 6 hours. So let me tell you, it was like sitting at a busy airport security for at least 5 hours. You have constant IV pulls beeping. You have 15 different conversations happening at once. Right? You've got televisions blaring, and of course, when you are immunosuppressed, like anyone on a biologic medication, one of the worst places to be is a hospital, because of course you are surrounded by infectious disease. So about 5 years ago, I pulled it into my home. Very cool thing. My recovery time went from 8 days to a very mild 3, just by changing the patient experience. That's something we have not been taking into account in medicine all of these years. because you really can't most of the time. But bringing it into the home, the patient is in their perfect environment. Now, the way it works, I use what's called a full-service pharmacy. Now, what they do is they ship me the medication on ice. I put it in my refrigerator. The next week, they deploy a nurse, and she sits there in my apartment for 5 or 6 hours giving me the medication, and she mixes it on site, right? Now, I thought that, of course, just my reduction in recovery time to 3 days was an incredible thing, and that alone is worth it. But guess what else? The cost that my insurance company is billed went from $28,000 to under $3,000 for the exact same treatment happening only 1 mile away. Over a 5-year period, that comes out to $1 million in difference in billing. Pretty crazy, right? Well, take this one step further. Because I have Crohn's disease, last year I ended up getting one of those, 24-hour GI flus. Pretty uncomfortable few days for a normal person, but when you have Crohn's disease, it can be life-threatening and within hours. I went to sleep on a Friday night and I was like, I'm not sure I feel too well. Next morning, by 7 or 8 a.m., I knew if I did not get IV saline, I would die. But the problem is I didn't want to go to my nearest emergency room to get IV saline because it's a level 1 trauma center, which means they are prepared for things like emergency surgery, brain surgery, heart surgery, major traffic accidents. All I needed was a nurse the first day out of nursing school to come and give me IV saline. I didn't want to waste, first of all, the resources at a level 1 trauma center, but secondly, of course, whenever you go into that environment, you are surrounded by infectious disease, and so I could have come out actually significantly sicker than I went in. So instead of calling an ambulance, I called IV Doc. In fact, I didn't even call them. I went on my app and I just ordered a nurse on demand. They had a nurse inside my apartment within about an hour, giving me 2 liters of IV saline. Cost about $250 a liter, out of pocket. This doesn't go through insurance. It doesn't go through your normal doctor. They do have doctors on staff, and so the doctor called me to see what was going on. And I coordinated this through email with my normal GI doctor and my normal primary care doctor. Kept them up to date on what I was doing. They knew I got the IV saline, and they checked in on me every day. So I was able to both avoid an ambulance ride and an ER visit, but even a potential hospitalization. Now let's take this one step further. If you can do IV saline in the home on an emergency basis, and you can do things like Remicade, which is a product that needs to be mixed by a healthcare professional on site right before you give it, we're already starting to see clinical trials going into the home as well. So companies like Science 37, they have about $72 million of funding, and by the way, in their Series C, was Sanofi, which is one of the largest of the big pharmas. But Science 37 partners with pharmas and med device companies. What they do is they ship the medication to the patient's home along with a tablet so that the tablet can be used for video visits with their clinical trials team. And this way you can expand the global patient pool with any individual type of clinical trial. Now, in addition, UPS has a division called Markin, and that's just their medical shipment division. And not only are they already in clinical trials, but they're looking into getting into vaccines, where you can ship the vaccine to the patient's home and then deploy a nurse to administer it. All right, so let's go back to our scenario. We had our point-of-care diagnostic. We sent the data to the cloud. It was shared across the care team, and in some cases, even potentially analyzed by artificial intelligence. We saw our physician in-home or by using telemedicine. Now, what about potentially getting our medication delivered by drone? Well, that's happening, and it's happening now. In fact, as of last year, the FAA released numbers saying there were over 900,000 drones already registered, and another 100,000 registered as commercial drones. We're seeing companies working on things like flying defibrillators. If you can get to a heart attack victim in under 60 seconds, you can increase survival rates from 8% to 80%. Now, as of March, the country's first drone delivery commercial happened, and this was March of 2019. This one was specific on the Wake Med Medical Campus, and it was a partnership between UPS and a company called Matternet. And what they are doing is they're taking patient blood samples where they're gotten in the clinic, and they're using a drone 3 times a day to ship them to the other parts of Wake Med Medical Center to the laboratories, right? And what this does is it saves 30 minutes per trip by using a car instead, right? That's pretty cool. Google Wing and UPS both are now approved by the FAA as airlines. This is a really big deal because now they are subject to the same rules and regulations as a cargo plane, which means they can go out of the line of sight from pilots, so it can be autonomous. In addition, UPS has permission to carry over 55 pounds by drone. This is a big deal, so we are going to see over the next couple of years a lot more happening from companies like UPS and Matternet. Earlier in 2019 as well, the country's first drone delivery for a kidney transplant happened as well. And it ended up with a very successful kidney transplant surgery. And Zipline, raise your hands, how many people have you guys heard of Zipline? Yeah? Okay. So it is the latest unicorn in the world of drones. Last year, they raised more funding, bringing their valuation now to $1.2 billion. Now, this is a little over a 3-year-old company. They've been in Ghana now for 3 years, and what they do is they deliver things like blood products. Because in the developing world, places like Ghana, one of the biggest killers is maternal bleeding. And that is completely solved. You can save the mom's life purely with a blood transfusion. But when you're dealing with countries like Rwanda and Ghana, they don't have roads where you can get things to patients really, really quickly. And of course, they don't have blood banks everywhere. And so Zipline is able to get a liter or a unit of blood to a patient in usually under 15 minutes, saving their life. They have now done over 13,000 deliveries, and they've gone into Rwanda. And between Rwanda and Ghana, they are delivering over 170 different products, including things like vaccines, medications, and medical supplies. And EHang. So if you haven't heard, a couple of years ago in Dubai, EHang went in there and to give people rides for an autonomous taxi, right? These were kind of proof of concept rides. They still haven't gone in there to do the autonomous taxis 24/7, but they're working with Dubai and the rules and regulations there to make that happen. But EHang has already done a big deal with Lung Biotechnologies. It's a cutting-edge transplant company, and they're going to get 1,000 units from EHang because they are 1- and 2-person, essentially ambulance drones. So right now, we're entering a perfect storm of technological advancements, enabling what I like to call the era of the patient. And so up until now, we've really been talking about that infrastructure disruption, how that shift in healthcare delivery and how that's coming out of the hospital and clinic. Let's dive a little bit into the world of hardware. So you've heard of the phrase, the Internet of Things? Well, I'm thinking about an Internet of You. We are experiencing a paradigm shift with absolutely everything going digital. The really cool thing about technology is it makes things seamless. A lot of companies are fighting to be that perfect dashboard that gives you that minute-by-minute report card on your health. Can aggregate your wearable tech data, integrate that into your electronic medical records, your EMR, and then really just give you insights when you need them. I think Apple is going to be the one who wins this particular race, purely because they already have 35 million Apple Watches distributed, and of course that is already a clinical grade device. And if you have an Apple phone, by the way, how many people in the audience have Apple phones? Okay, so if you do, what you can do is now download the patient portal side of your electronic medical record in one push of a button, right? And so you just set that up, and so all of a sudden, they're aggregating people's electronic medical record data, right? I think they're going to be one of the world leaders in this. And CMS, Center of Medicare and Medicaid, they are the ones who set the standard in healthcare, and they are right now leading the way in remote patient monitoring codes. So doctors and nurses, clinics, can get reimbursed now for setting up patients with wearable technology, whether that's just a plain old Fitbit or it's a continuous glucose monitor like Dexcom. They can get reimbursed for doing the actual monitoring, even if it's software, and they can get reimbursed for any communication that happens as a result of monitoring. Right? This is thousands and thousands of dollars extra a year reimbursed per patient, right? Something you can take advantage of if you're working in a clinic now. And because biometric monitoring has gone mainstream with things like the Apple Watch and the Fitbit, patients are no longer confused if they walk into a doctor's office and the doctor says, "We want to do remote patient monitoring on you." They're not like, "What is that?" Everyone already knows what it's like, right? So it's much easier sell. Now, today we're seeing a lot of different watches that come out and they do individual things. So the one on the left, that measures your pulse oximeter, the amount of oxygen in your blood. It's one of the things that they would measure, especially if you just go right into an emergency room. But it's fantastic for patients with things like asthma or COPD. Now, the other two you see on that slide, those are blood pressure monitoring watches. One is by BioBeat, the other one is Omron. Now, Omron launched in the spring of 2019 for about $500 direct to consumer, and it sold out immediately. There is a major demand for things like continuous blood pressure monitoring. Now, while these are individual, in a few years, we're going to start to see a lot of these watches be multifunctional. So they can do 3 or 4 different vital signs, if not more, at one time. We're also seeing diabetes monitoring getting simplified. So if you haven't heard of CGMs yet, continuous glucose monitors, there are quite a few on the market. So the Dexcom and the Abbott Freestyle Libre, the Dexcom is on the left in the picture. The way it works is it has a little filament that sticks right under the skin, either here or here, and then it measures glucose in interstitial body fluid. So it's a little bit of a delay from blood glucose, but it really helps so that patients with diabetes don't have to constantly be checking their blood glucose. They can check it using the Dexcom or the Abbott Freestyle Libre. The one on the right, that's an implantable by a company called Eversense, and they have FDA clearance for a 3-month-long implantable. The way it works is you have to go to a doctor or a healthcare professional, but they implant it right under the skin, and it stays there for 3 months. So you don't have to worry about changing it like you do with the Dexcom and the Abbott. We're seeing sensors going on to inhalers. Both Propeller and Adherium have clearance with the FDA, and they're just sensors that fit on any normal inhaler. So you can track things like when the patient is using their inhaler and where they are to see if maybe their asthma or COPD or allergies are worse in specific times of day or in specific environments. We're even seeing sensors going into clothing. One on the left, that is a company called Siren Care, and it measures the temperature of the bottom of your feet. Most of you are like, why would you do that, right? It's because in the world of diabetes, if you get a foot ulcer and you don't notice it right away, it can potentially not heal, and eventually you are at risk for having an amputation. That is crazy, right? Like just the thought of that. And so these are on a subscription model. Siren Care sends you 5 different pairs of socks. By the way, it's covered by Medicare, Medicaid. And the way it works is you wear the socks and you just throw them in the washing machine. And it will constantly monitor the bottom of your feet for hot spots to alert you and your healthcare professional before you actually get an ulcer on the bottom of your foot. Now, the one on the right, that is HealthWatch. It is a 12-lead ICU quality EKG monitor. Now, while the single lead ones are great on things like the Apple Watch to test for like AFib, which is atrial fibrillation, if you have AFib, which is a completely silent disease most of the time, you have no idea you have it. But if you do have it, you are 5 times more likely to have a stroke. Now, with a 12-lead EKG, this is for patients who have been in things like the ICU and need continuous monitoring of their heart to catch things way before a problem happens so that you can intervene. Now, in terms of the patient experience, What gets measured gets monitored. All of these different technologies are really providing data points for action, and it can help the patient avoid clinic visits and hospitalizations. All right, so how you guys doing so far? Good? Okay. So we talked about the infrastructure, we talked about the hardware. I'm going to spend the rest of the time now talking about software. In my longer talks, I will talk about the medical science, tissue engineering, and the microbiome. We just don't have time for that today. So we're going to close it out for the next 20 minutes or so on artificial intelligence. Now, AI is not a new technology. In fact, it's quite an old technology, and the phrase was coined in the 1950s. The reason we are seeing so much going on in the world of healthcare with AI is from this one simple fact. When you are talking about artificial intelligence, life begins at 1 billion data points. Anything less than that, and you're not able to use artificial intelligence on it. We needed to be able to aggregate and clean up that much data to really even start to make headway in healthcare. And of course, the market is exploding over the next couple of years. It's expected to be a $6.6 billion industry. And the error rate for understanding spoken English has dropped to under 4.9%. And in fact, using the most cutting edge in the world of corporates and academia, the error rate for understanding spoken English has dropped to under 3%. Now, if you are a native-born American English speaker, your error rate is about 4%, which means AI is now better at understanding English than Americans are. Now, this is hitting healthcare in multiple ways. Things like patient engagement. You know, your Amazon Alexa is now HIPAA compliant. So you can walk past it and Amazon Alexa can say things like, hey, have you taken your medication today? Right? We're seeing it with physician notes. The EMR, the electronic medical record, is really the bane of the existence of the healthcare professional for doctors and nurses. It's very onerous to use. Well, companies like eClinicalWorks, they now have a bot called Ada, and it works just the same as Amazon Alexa does. You go up to the EMR, to the computer, and you say, hey, Ada, can you pull up Farmanfarmaian's lab results from today? And it's able to do that. How cool is that? We're also seeing it being used in aging in place, and I'll talk about a device in a few minutes about that, but being able to keep people in their homes longer because they can interact with a smart speaker or a smart tablet just by using voice commands. And lastly, vocal biomarkers. How cool is that, right? I bet you, okay, raise your hands, how many people have heard of a vocal biomarker? Probably none of you, right? And that's with most of my talks. If you Google it now, you will see a lot of different companies working on it, but this is the beginning of this particular industry. It's using a patient's tone of voice, the way they string words together over a period of time, their speed of their speech, and how they are talking as one data point in an overall diagnosis. Now, if you want to see one good example of this, Mayo Clinic, last year, they published a study, and they see a correlation between a patient's voice and coronary artery disease, CAD, which is the top 5 most expensive disease. So we'll get to the point where Amazon Alexa or any of your other smart speakers will be able to start to tell if someone is getting into trouble with things like coronary artery disease. Now, about 25% of the US right now has smart speakers. How many people, you guys have smart speakers? Raise your hands. Yep, right there you go. So over the next few years, that's expected to increase to about 55%. There's been over 100 million Amazon Alexas now been distributed. And in terms of Google Siri, over 1 billion, because of course it comes in the phone. In addition, Google Siri is in 30 different languages. Now we're seeing things, not just smart speakers, but they can be in other forms as well. I'm standing next to the iPal robot here. It's a few $1,000s. It's specific for childcare and for dementia care. He's very cute, but he doesn't do anything besides it has the tablet and it has the voice. It's not like being a robot, he can't pick things up. What he can do is he can do a little dance for you and things like that. But really it's just a smart speaker with pretend eyes and a tablet. The one on the right, that's the LEQ, and that is specific for dementia care. It comes with that tablet. It can do medication reminders, things like reminiscence therapy. When you're sitting with a patient who has dementia, a lot of the time the caregiver has to go over the same stories over and over again. Well, things like the LEQ can make that much easier because it takes the place of that healthcare professional or caregiver. And we're seeing smart speakers going into hospitals now. Cedars-Sinai and Northwell Health, they're putting smart speakers into patients' rooms. So the patients can interact with their room, they can interact with their healthcare team. In addition, they can even interact with their electronic medical record by using voice. Mayo Clinic, they're using it for post-surgical instructions for patients for skin lesions. And Boston Children's Hospital, they're using smart speakers to brief their transplant teams before the doctors and nurses go into the operating room. We've seen at least 50 different 50 different artificial intelligence software programs now clear the FDA in the past few years. Can you believe that? That's quite a large number. Now, most of these different software programs are really around imaging analysis, things like CAT scans, PET scans, MRIs, echocardiograms, mammograms. Because, of course, that's what AI is best at, which is pattern analysis, imaging analysis. Now, most of these are just there to really augment the healthcare professional. You've got your specialist, your radiologist, and the AI software program can say, hey, by the way, did you look at these few things? That is all of these except for one case, that is. IDX, it's a company that is doing something called diabetic retinopathy. And it is cleared the FDA, and it no longer requires a healthcare professional of any kind to interpret the results. This is a really big deal. Now, the way it works is you still have to go to a clinic to have your eyes checked. But what happens, that can be done by a nurse or a technician. The software program then analyzes it in about 60 seconds, and it'll give you a binary answer. Yes, the patient has early stage diabetic retinopathy, or no, the patient is good to go, come back next year and get checked. Now, raise your hands in the room. How many people have a baseline on their blood pressure? Okay. How many people have a baseline on their cholesterol? Okay. How many people have a baseline on their brain health? None of us. That's the problem. Did you know about 30% of dementia is preventable? Preventable, right? The problem is that most of us don't go and see a neurologist to have brain testing until we're so far advanced in something like dementia that it's impeding our daily life. And that typically means it is too far advanced for pharmaceutical intervention or lifestyle behavior modification to actually make a difference in the disease. Well, BrainCheck is changing that. It is a software program that has gamified and electronified the standard neurological exams that you have inside of a doctor's office. And they're actually really fun. It takes about 10 minutes to take on an iPad, and it's quite fun now that I think about it. The way it works is that you get this now through your primary care office. And so you can call up your doctor, they can send you the software program, the app, or you can do it in the doctor's office. And you can catch things or get a baseline on your brain health so that every year you can start to catch things way before they become a problem and hopefully and potentially avoid dementia. We're also seeing apps by prescription only. So the one on the left, that is from Therapeutics, and they are the world leader right now in the world of digital therapeutics, prescription apps. And this is specific around addiction. One on the right, that is from a company called Big Health, and it is specifically around insomnia. Now, both of these use what's called CBT, cognitive behavior therapy, and they're used in conjunction with your healthcare professional, your therapist or your doctor. That's why they're by prescription only. And a story coming out of Walmart. This is very cool. So Walmart took first of all, Walmart has about 1 million employees here in the United States, and they are self-insured, which means it's in their best interest to not only have their employees healthy because then they can go to work, but they cover their health care. So Walmart took 20 years of back consumer shopping data, layered it over 20 years of healthcare data. Turns out if you change your laundry detergent one time in a year, you are 50 times more likely to have diabetes or prediabetes. Well, that's mind-blowing, right? Turns out we're creatures of habit. So for things like laundry detergent, we only change if there actually ends up being, if there's a problem. Well, turns out one of the early symptoms of diabetes is sensitive skin. And one of the first things that we think to do is, oh, maybe I developed an allergy to my laundry detergent, and we go and we switch it out. Well, now that Walmart has identified those particular employees that they cover that are 50 times more likely to have prediabetes, they can send them an intervention, mail them a Fitbit or an Apple Watch and say, hey, if you use this, by the way, take this free device, and if you use this 10,000 steps a day, every day, we're going to give you $100 back on your health insurance every month. So they can actually make money, right, by intervening. And virtual reality. So virtual reality is really a convergence of multiple technologies, but the software part itself, it is driven by artificial intelligence. Now, we're seeing a lot going on in healthcare right now. Things like PTSD. The military has been working with virtual reality for years now with things, what's called immersion therapy. You put the soldier back into the area where they received PTSD, and they can control the situation, and it's working really well. We're seeing other companies doing things like pain management control. Here in this picture, I'm using a company called DeepStream, and it is used in the clinic for pain management. We're also seeing VR being used for things like stroke and brain injury rehabilitation. So there's a company called MindMaze, has an over $1 billion valuation. They do have FDA clearance, but they're still just in Europe. They're based in Switzerland. And it is actually working. So let me tell you how this works. In virtual reality, imagine you have a patient who has had a stroke and has their left arm partially paralyzed. Typically, you'd have to go to a physical therapist, and they'd work with you to get your range of motion back and being able to, lift it and things like that. Well, in virtual reality, what we do is we take a mirror image of your right arm, and we layer it over your left arm. So in VR, when you move your right arm, it looks to your brain like you're moving your left arm, like this, and that is enough to trick the brain into thinking it's real. And we're seeing improved outcomes and, of course, bigger efficacy, but the big thing is that it's fun. In virtual reality, you're not just doing things like flying a plane, you are the plane. And in addition, MindMaze is able to turn off something called phantom pain with one session. If you have an amputation, say your arm has been amputated, sometimes patients get what's called phantom pain, where it feels like your brain thinks it's still there, so it's just constantly hurting. So we're able to trick the brain with one session using that same mirror image technique, turning off the phantom pain. How cool is that? Now, of course, all of this technology has really raised the bar on the interaction between the patient and the physician. So I'd like to explain the title of my book here, The Patient as CEO, because some people think that means that people should be the actual healthcare professional or practice medicine, and that's not what it means at all. I like to equate it to the CEO of a corporation. So if you're the CEO of a normal corporation, you're not necessarily an expert in marketing, finance, legal, engineering. You hire the best experts. They do their job, report back to you, and together, as a team, you decide on a direction for a company to go into. But as CEO, it is your ultimate responsibility that that vision is carried out. The company overall is successful. So I ask, why should being a patient be any different? But I do realize that being a patient can be absolutely terrifying. And that's why we're seeing a lot going on in the world of health and life coaching. Now, sometimes this is done with an app. It can be done by artificial intelligence, where you just check in, or you check in with the patient every once in a while. It can be done by problem solvers, right? Not necessarily healthcare professionals, because a lot of the time, it may not be that a patient doesn't understand their medication. It may be something like, oh, their driver's license expired and now they have no idea how to get to their doctor's office, right? It could be just something as simple as that, and problem solver on the team can help make that happen. In addition, companies like United Healthcare, so I'm one of their patients, they have assigned a nurse to my case for the past few years, and she calls me once a month and she says things like, hey Robin, how you doing? Let's catch up. She goes, still on all the same medications? Let's go over that list. Oh, and by the way, are you able to get to your doctor's appointments? Because if not, we're gonna help you get there. And that's why we're seeing companies like Uber and Lyft have these large healthcare departments. And by the way, your healthcare doctor, your healthcare professional, whether it's your doctor or nurse, can now use a landline to call Uber or Lyft and arrange a transport for your patient. And the patient, assuming that they don't have a smartphone, can also use a landline. By the way, this is called non-emergency medical transport, and it is now covered by Medicare and Medicaid. So I want to leave you with this thought. Are you still practicing or receiving your health care the same way you were back in, say, 2014? Because if you are, it's time for an upgrade. Thank you.